Quad always walked with confidence, her big smile and luxury lifestyle making it seem like she had it all. But behind it all, there was more to the story. The latest season of Married to Medicine just took a wild turn. Everyone thought Quad had finally moved on from Dr. G, but reality hit hard, and the truth couldn't stay hidden. This season, she showed up with a new man, a tall, handsome guy named King. And from the start, she made one thing clear. This wasn't just some casual fling. This wasn't just a new relationship, it was a message. Quad had moved up, moved on, and left the past behind. Or at least, that's what she wanted everyone to think. But here's where it got real. King wasn't just some guy. His name alone carried weight, power, success, and the ultimate way for Quad to prove she had won. If there was ever a way to show Dr. G she had leveled up, this was it. Then came the big moment, her birthday. King went all out, surprising her with the grandest gift yet, a brand new Rolls-Royce Cullinan, sitting there with a giant bow, just for her. Right there, waiting outside their front door, was the kind of gift that turned heads, the kind that made a statement, grabbed attention, and screamed, "Look at me now." And Quad? She loved every second of it. The cameras caught it all, her excitement, her pride, that glow on her face as she showed off her new life. But here's where things took a turn. No matter how much she tried to prove she was happy, the cracks started to show. It all became clear the moment she and King joined the couple's trip. Something about her energy just wasn't right. At first, she played it cool, laughing, chatting, acting like nothing could bother her. But the second she saw Dr. G and Sweet Tea together, everything changed. Her smile didn't feel as real, her laughter wasn't as light. No matter how hard she tried to hide it, you could feel the tension. But this wasn't just about a breakup. It was about old wounds, feelings that never fully faded, and a woman still holding onto something she wasn't ready to face. No matter how much she tried to cover it up with luxury, the past still weighed on her. And then, things took a turn. The group sat down for a chill evening, drinks in hand, easy conversation, plenty of laughs. It all started light, just jokes and teasing. But it didn't take long before things went left. Someone threw out a comment about relationships, and just like that, all eyes were on Quad. How was life with King? How different was he from Dr. G? That's when the cracks started to show. At first, she laughed it off. At first, she brushed it off like it was no big deal. But then, out of nowhere, she switched up. Instead of keeping it light, she started comparing. She went on about how much better her life was now, how much happier she was, how King was everything Dr. G could never be. But here's the crazy part. She wasn't just talking to the group. She was talking to Dr. G. Her words had a little more weight, like there was something still there. And Dr. G? He wasn't smiling anymore. Sweet Tea shifted in her seat, feeling the tension. But Quad wasn't done. She leaned in, her voice sharper, her words hitting even harder. "See, I got what I wanted. A man who treats me right, spoils me, and doesn't hold me back." There was something in her tone, something heavy, like years of built-up frustration finally spilling out. And just when it seemed like things might blow over, she dropped the real bomb. "I'm who you want to be, sweetie." And that was the moment everything flipped. Sweet Tea, who had been trying to stay cool, wasn't about to let Quad talk down to her. And in an instant the energy in the room shifted from tense to explosive. Sweet Tea fired back, refusing to let Quad have the last word. "You can have all the money in the world, but guess what, he still doesn't want you," she snapped, and just like that the battle lines were drawn. Dr. G, caught between his past and present, sat there stunned, and King, he watched in silence, realization dawning on him. This wasn't about him, this wasn't about their new perfect relationship, this was about Dr. G, this was about a past that Quad had never truly left behind, and for the first time it became clear no matter how much Quad tried to prove she had won, deep down she was still fighting a battle that should have ended long ago. But here's the shocking part, just when everyone thought that attention had hit its peak, things took an even darker turn. The argument between Quad and Sweet Tea wasn't just a heated exchange, it was a full-blown emotional battlefield. Sweet Tea had come prepared to defend her place, but Quad wasn't just Fighting her, she was fighting the ghost of her past, and Dr. G, he found himself caught in the middle, visibly uncomfortable, trying to control the situation, but failing miserably. This is where it gets interesting. Instead of diffusing the situation, Dr. G, something no one expected, he turned on Sweet Tea. Frustrated, embarrassed, and clearly shaken by the confrontation, he scolded his new wife right in front of everyone. "You don't have to argue with her," he snapped, his voice carrying an authority that shocked the group. Sweet Tea froze, taken aback, and for the first time doubt flickered in her eyes. Was she really standing up for herself, or had she just exposed a deeper issue in her marriage? What makes this story different is that the real cracks weren't just in Quad's past, they were in Sweet Tea's present. Everyone had assumed she was the carefree, confident new wife who had effortlessly stepped into Quad's old life, but at that moment reality hit. She wasn't just Quad's replacement, she was living in the shadow of a marriage that had never fully ended. And when Dr. G chose to scold her instead of addressing Quad's behavior, the truth was undeniable. He still cared, whether he admitted it or not. The craziest part, instead of backing down, Sweet Tea refused to let the moment define her. She turned to Dr. G with fire in her eyes. "Oh, so now I'm the problem?" she shot back. "Not the ex-wife who's still obsessed with you, not the woman who can't move on. You're mad at me." The air in the room became suffocating, thick with tension no one could ignore. The other couple sat frozen, unsure of where this was going. But one thing was clear: this wasn't just some petty argument. This was about unresolved feelings, misplaced loyalty, and a man who had never fully closed the door on his past. And then, just when things couldn't get any more tense, destiny took a turn. King, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke. Up until now, he had just watched, but something in his face changed. He wasn't just surprised, he was disappointed. "Quad," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Why do you care so much?" His question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had just happened. The room went silent, all eyes turned to Quad, waiting for her response. But she didn't have one, because at that moment the truth was undeniable. She did care more than she wanted to admit, more than she had ever let on, and no amount of money, luxury, or grand romantic gestures could change that. For the first time, the reality of her situation hit her. She had spent so much time trying to prove she had one, but in doing so, had she really? Her silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. The room felt heavier by the second, every moment dragging out as everyone waited for her to respond. But she just stood there, eyes shifting between King, Dr. G, and Sweet Tea, almost like she was searching for the right words. Except there were no right words, because deep down, she knew the truth. No matter how much she pretended, she was still carrying the weight of her past. "See, I told you, babe," she said, turning to Dr. G. She's still pressed. The word stung, but Quad didn't let it show. She covered it up with a sharp laugh. "Pressed, sweetheart? The only thing I'm pressed about is how you let your man check you in public like a child." Gasps filled the room. The tension between them had been building all night, but this was the moment it blew up. Sweet Tea walked into this marriage thinking she had one, believing she was living the life Quad couldn't keep. But as she stood there, watching Dr. G's reaction, something shifted. He didn't rush to defend her. He didn't comfort her. He just shook his head and muttered, "Here we go again." It was quick, but it was enough. For a split second, Sweet Tea's face dropped, just long enough for Quad to catch it. And the craziest part? Quad took it as a win. She smirked, folded her arms, and in that moment. Thing about playing House Sweet Tea, you can decorate the rooms, you can change the furniture, but at the end of the day, that house still holds the memories of the people who came before you. The message was clear: no matter how much Sweet Tea tried, she would always be living in Quad's shadow. And in that moment, it finally hit her. Maybe she hadn't really won after all. Destiny took an unexpected turn. When decided he had heard enough, he let out a sigh and stepped forward, placing a hand on Quad's shoulder. "Come on," he said softly, "let go." But Quad didn't move. She was too caught up in the fire of the moment, too fueled by the need to have the last word. Kink grip on her shoulder tightened, just slightly, a silent warning. "Quad," he said again, this time more firmly, "let it go." And that was the real question. Wasn't it could she let it go? Because this wasn't just about Sweet Tea or Dr. G. This was about her, about the fact that no matter how much he tried to convince the world that she had moved on, she still felt the sting of being replaced. And as much as she wanted to prove she had won, maybe, just maybe, she was still trying to win a game that had already ended. But here's the shocking part: Quad didn't leave, even with King's firm grip on her shoulder. Even with the tension so thick it was hard to breathe, she stayed rooted to the spot. Something inside her refused to back down. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was the years of unresolved hurt, or maybe, just maybe, she wasn't ready to walk away from the one person who still had the power to get under her skin. Dr. G. This is where it gets interesting. The room was silent, every eye locked on Quad as she took a deep breath and finally spoke. "You think I care about this?" she scoffed, gesturing vaguely towards Sweet Tea. "You think I'm standing here because I'm jealous?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "No, baby. I'm standing here because I need you to understand something." Dr. G crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "Understand what, Quad?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with frustration. Quad's eyes darkened. "That I never lost anything. You didn't leave me. And I sure as hell didn't lose you. I walked away from a situation that was never meant for me, and you just found someone who was willing to accept the version of you I refused to talk to." What makes this story different this time? It wasn't just Sweet Tea who was taken. Dr. G blinked, his jaw tightening ever so slightly. Quad had hit a nerve, and everyone in the room knew it. Even Sweet Tea, who had been confidently throwing jabs all night, suddenly looked unsure, because deep down a question hung in the air. Was Quad right? Had Dr. G really found his perfect match, or had he just settled for someone who wouldn't challenge him the way Quad did? The craziest part: King was still standing there watching it all unfold with an unreadable expression. He had been patient, giving Quad space to vent, but now he was starting to see the truth. This wasn't just an argument, this wasn't just drama, this was unfinished business. And as much as Quad wanted to act like she was over it, her words, her body language, her unwillingness to leave it all said otherwise. Destiny took an unexpected turn when Sweet Tea finally snapped. "You know what, Quad?" she hissed, stepping closer. "For someone who claims to be so happy and moved on, you sure do spend a lot of time worrying about what we're doing." Quad smirked. "Oh, sweetheart," she said smoothly, "I'm not worried about what you're doing. I'm just making sure you understand exactly what you signed up for." The tension exploded. Sweet Tea lunged forward, and for a second it looked like things were about to get physical. But before she could take another step, Dr. G grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Enough," he said sharply, his voice laced with authority. "We're done here." And just like that, the moment shattered. Sweet Tea glared at Quad, breathing heavily. Quad tilted her head, triumphant. "And King," he finally stepped in. "Yeah," he said, his voice low, "we are done here." He didn't wait for Quad to respond. He simply grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door, and this time she followed. But here's the thing: just because they walked away didn't mean it was over. No, this was just the beginning of something bigger, because the truth had just started to unravel. But this is where it gets even messier. Even after leaving that explosive confrontation, the tension didn't disappear. It followed Quad and King like a dark cloud hanging over them as they reached their room. King let go of her hand the moment they stepped inside, running a frustrated hand down his face. He had been patient, understanding, even amused at first, but now he wasn't laughing. "You're still in love with him?" King said flatly, his voice devoid of emotion. Quad froze, her heartbeat pounded in her ears. "Excuse me," she scoffed, trying to play it off. But King wasn't buying it. "You heard me," he said, turning to face her. "You're still in love with Dr. G, and tonight just proved it." The accusation hung between them like a bomb waiting to explode. Quad let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "That's ridiculous," she muttered, walking toward the vanity and avoiding his gaze. "I was just setting the record straight." She needed to be put in her place, but King wasn't about to let her dodge the truth, and that had nothing to do with him. He pressed. "Nothing to do with the fact that the moment you saw him with someone else, you couldn't help but remind him and everyone else that you were the better choice." What makes this story different this time? It wasn't Dr. G or Sweet Tea exposing the cracks in Quad's carefully built walls. It was the man who had been standing beside her, believing he was her future, only to realize he might just be a distraction from her past. The craziest part: Quad didn't have an answer. She wanted to snap back to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come, because deep down a small voice whispered, "What if he's right?" Destiny took an unexpected turn when King sighed, stepping closer. "I'm not about to be somebody's placeholder, Quad," he said, his voice softer now, but firm. "I won't compete with a ghost." That hit her hard. She finally looked up at him, her defenses cracking. "King, it's not like that," she whispered. But before she could finish, a sharp knock at the door cut through the moment. Quad's head snapped toward it, her pulse spiking. Who would be coming to her room this late? King shot her a look before walking over and pulling the door open, and the moment he did, everything changed, because Standing there looking hesitant, but determined was Dr. G. Now this is where everything truly unravels.